Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky angle where I talk about electronic music both new and old, and today I'm talking about the new album from tyDi and Christopher Tin, Collide. Right, tyDi is a commercial trance artist from Australia, and Christopher Tin is a soundtrack composer. I'm admittedly not super familiar with either one's previous work. I mainly picked this up on a recommendation from Landon Remixes, who actually got the chance to interview these guys in his review, which is pretty awesome, I will have to say. Go check that video out if you haven't already. Now, I did know tyDi from his work on BT's A Song Across Wires. He co-produced the tracks Stem the Tides and Tonight, which were both highlights on that album for me. I've browsed through some of tyDi's other stuff, listened to his Shooting Stars album, and that was pretty good. He seems to be a bit more distinctive than most commercial trance artists. Guy has some glitch elements in there, and other various interesting elements occasionally as well. Clearly inspired by BT with all the stutter edits. Now, Shooting Stars was a fun listen, but I don't know if I'm entirely in love. Certainly better than average for this kind of thing. But it was a bit overstuffed and inconsistent, if you ask me. Some tracks I really liked, some I just thought were okay, and I don't know if I really see myself putting it on regularly. I did enjoy it, though, I guess. I was too lazy to check out his other solo stuff. I think I heard some orchestral elements on his Redefined album through iTunes previews, but also some more commercial elements that I was less into. I don't know, I didn't hear the whole thing, obviously, so I wouldn't know. As for Christopher Tin, he has worked on the game Civilization 4. He's won 2 Grammys for his classical crossover album, Calling All Dawns, which was pretty awesome from what I heard. Also, he worked on the orchestral arrangements on BT's electronic opus. Now, this album here, Collide, is billed as being something pretty similar to electronic opus, a combination of electronic and orchestral music, though executed in a slightly different way. Electronic opus was obviously a greatest hits album with the orchestra just kind of put on top, but Collide was all original material created with the orchestra's placement in mind. And it looks to me like the way they went about doing that for the most part was not really combining them as often, but putting them next to each other so that they wouldn't end up clashing with each other and cause massive mastering headaches. Now, I will freely admit to some major phantom menacing on my part when it comes to electronic opus. I found it increasingly difficult to defend my love for it as time has gone by, thanks to various shady circumstances surrounding that album, among other things. I mean, it was my favorite album of 2015, but I feel like it got to that spot out of pure fanboyism and love for the concept. But despite what people like, say, Deadmau5 might say, the actual mastering job is not something I personally have a problem with. BT obviously set out there to make sure the electronics and orchestras got equal billing when played at the same time, and I still think it holds up well, especially on moments like Skylarking in 1.618. Whether it turned out to be a failure, I think depends on whether you like the idea of electronics and orchestras being given equal space at the same time, and if you came there specifically for the orchestra, I can see why that would be a major disappointment, but I still hold that the mastering job was well done, personally. I mean, I would not say that I am a genius mastering engineer myself, but I do think I have enough experience in the field to A, know whether something sounds like it was mixed properly, and B, to know how seriously difficult it is to get it right. Especially when it comes to an album with as many musical elements as this one. But that's still the least of my issues. So enough prelude, the question is, how good is Collide? Okay, I'll first put it this way. I'm the kind of guy who is always going to enjoy the combination of orchestral music with electronic music. And the reason for that is one of my favorite bands of all time is Hybrid, who've been doing this kind of thing since the end of the 90s, and quite frankly still stand as the best example of orchestras implemented within electronic music. So thanks to my status as a longtime Hybrid fan, just by the concept alone, I knew I was going to like Collide a lot. And I mean, I was kind of scared the album was just going to be switching between electronic and orchestra without them really mixing and working together in a natural way, and they do actually pull that off well. So that lifted a major burden off my mind. Like, as a side note, I think the track Gold Blooded might contain a nod to the Hybrid track If I Survive in its intro. There's some pretty noticeable similarity there. And if that was on purpose, I give my thumbs up to these guys for that. From a mastering perspective, this album is also really well done, so that's no issue here either. The orchestral arrangements on this album are all absolutely excellent. Warm, textured, expansive, really beautiful stuff all around. Christopher Tin, seriously, he seriously killed it on this thing. All the praises in the world for what he's brought to the table. But the album is still quite flawed in my eyes, and that is entirely on tyDi's shoulders. The electronic elements of this album are not as consistently impressive as the orchestral elements. Again, not because they clash or anything, with the exception of one moment which admittedly pissed me off, but I'll get to that. My main problem is just that a lot of the electronic elements are so modernized. They're sticking to sounds that are popular in 2018. I mean, if you happen to like the sound of popular EDM these days, I'm sure you'll have no problem with it. I don't think they're badly done for what they are. But, you know, stuff like the vocal chops and the snaps and everything do lead to something I think is just gonna lead to this album sounding dated. It was something I had to re-listen to quite a few times in order to warm up to it at all. For instance, when I heard the track Gold-Blooded, I mean, I was really captivated by the orchestras in the beginning. I really liked the build-up once the vocals came in. But then the drop caught me off guard and had me thinking, really? Are we doing that on this album? But no, that wasn't the moment that pissed me off. I'll just get that out of the way right here since it's directly related. No matter how many times I listened to this bugged me. The track Closing In had the potential to be one of my favorite tracks on this album. The compositions are really beautiful, they're pretty catchy, the drop is really good on top of that. But at one point, while the orchestras and vocals are starting to build up, tyDi brings in the freaking Kygo snap sound effect and just kind of plasters it on top, and it feels misplaced. Anytime I hear that, I'm just like, ah, fuck you, you ruined it. I mean, it's not the exact same sound effect that Kygo and everyone else uses, but it's similar enough to know that's what he was going for. And I really, really wish he hadn't gone for that. Might even be a little worse since the snap tyDi used here sounds even more fake and brittle than the usual one everyone else uses. But whatever, when you really get down to it, aside from that one moment, the really modernized sound doesn't really take away from the album that much. I just think what tyDi did here kind of slaps a date and time on this album. Orchestral music, especially this kind of arrangement, to me is timeless. This whole Hans Zimmer, John Williams, whoever you want to compare it to, style of composing, is the kind of thing you hear in the background of movies. And they don't remind you of the time when they came out. I presume this kind of thing is exactly why deadmau5 believes orchestral and electronic music ought not to be combined at all, if the synths can't do justice to the orchestra. But I'm also kind of a weird guy who grew up surrounding himself in 90s techno and all that kind of stuff. As a result, even though it's not going to sound timeless to everyone, a lot of it will sound more timeless to me. Unless you're, like, really obvious about your particular influences and try to make, like, an artificial intelligence style album. I'm not gonna blink at those kinds of styles. 75 to 80% of the electronic elements in this album do not stick out to me like that. Be it the trance elements, which are just cliches I'm so used to hearing over so many years that I don't blink at them at all. Feels like I'm listening to Way Out West or something sometimes. And even the low-pitched dubstep-esque whirring, that doesn't exemplify the overblown stereotypes of that genre. I mean, Hybrid and BT have both utilized these kinds of sounds in the past, so that doesn't sound unnatural to me either. Point is, it's just the elements that are trendy right now implemented in this album. That's the remaining 20-25% that I think take away from the overall effects. But going on from there, the other issue I kind of have with this album is that, again, if you remove Christopher Tin from this album, I would again just think this album to be pretty forgettable and nothing special or worth returning to. And this goes for even my favorite tracks on this album. A lot of the original compositions here are just kind of lean towards the generic pop side. There's a lot of standard 4 chords progressions that just leave me thinking, you could do better, can't you? Many tracks here feel really basic to me to the point of me not being able to get into certain tracks as much as I like, and that also kind of bleeds over into the orchestral compositions, unfortunately. Sometimes that ends up making them sound like they belong more in commercials than they do in a more ambitious project like this. A good example of this would be Did You Know? The orchestras are beautiful, even tyDi's glitchy drop is fun and doesn't take away from the experience, but The main chord progression is the 4 chords of pop in C major, and the hook is just, "Did you know that I love you?" I mean, not that BT is better in the lyrics regard. Emergency. But I just left a lot of these tracks hoping for something more out of them. Same with the closer, Alive. Instrumental track, different tempo from the usual formula set by the genre, but again, standard 4 chords. Like, just little things like this that I keep finding frustrating. Also, I found a lot of the vocal performances to be on the underwhelming side. I mean, I could be wrong about this, but something about this album feels like they did the vocals before they added the orchestra in. The singers don't sound like they're putting the emotive presence in a couple of these tracks to match the orchestras behind them. And it does lead to this album getting stale more quickly than this kind of album probably should. I mean, maybe they could hear the orchestras while they were recording, I have no idea, but it was just something that felt ever so slightly off to me. Like, Electronic Opus was a concert before it was an album, and I felt like I could tell all the singers there were feeling the music as you could really hear it. But, I don't know, whatever. So, even though I have heavily ragged on this album for all the things that I've said, as many problems as I have with it, I want to make it clear that I have found a lot more to enjoy here than I didn't. Yes, everything I've mentioned thus far has been stuff I've personally found bothersome. In the end, how much I like the track, though, comes down to whether or not I think tyDi's original idea for the track works, and there are more hits than misses on this thing. Everything I See is a very effective opener, it's interesting, shows what this idea has to offer, the track is also catchy, contains among the most emotive performances on here. Upside Down, as well, was one of the most satisfying and catchiest tracks on here. Closing In, aside from that goddamn snap effect, was a really great track. Can't Look Away has quite possibly the best intro of all of these tracks, just so warm and expansive, and continues to complement the remainder of the track excellently, even if it's not among the catchiest on the album. I really liked the other instrumental on here, Losing Sight. That was a good one. Fallen Angel was a deliciously bitter track that manages to encompass the weight that the title seems to imply, despite the modernized elements. But there's still moments like, you know, Tell Me, which despite having some brilliantly dark passages, has some generic ones, and Don't Forget Us, which is ironically quite forgettable. It's so frustrating because I really want to recommend this album higher because I love the idea and I think for the most part it's well executed. It's just all these little nitpicks that I have that prevent me from being able to prop it up as something truly excellent in my eyes. I will say though, this album is worth at least a couple of listens all the way through. There are so many brilliant moments in this thing, but there are also many unimaginative moments that I just can't fully overlook, and prevent me from seeing myself putting this into heavy rotation in the future. And even so, for what it's worth, these guys had a harder job to pull off than BT, who had built-in nostalgia and emotion from my attachment to the rest of his back catalog. tyDi and Christopher Tin were more ambitious here by making all of this material original. Their goal was going to be harder to achieve such a high standard. So, yeah, in general, if you're looking for a much more well-executed fusion of electronic and orchestral music, then Hybrid are still the pinnacle of that in my eyes. But when all is said and done, I do still recommend Collide. It's worth a listen. It's probably not going to have a lot of staying power with me or make my year-end list, but since I do always enjoy the fusion of these genres and I think there is enough brilliant stuff in here, I would still say it's worth a shot. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. I'm overall feeling a 7.7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.